What's up, everyone? Welcome back to week 2 of our series, Uncommon Joy. We are so happy that you're joining us tonight. Just want to say a couple things real quick. If you aren't already, follow us on Instagram at thehouse901. This is the best way to stay up to date with everything that we have going on. We want to make sure that you don't miss anything. This way you can get all the details for anything we have going on. We have a actual house event up here at our East Memphis campus on November the 3rd. So be sure to be following us so you can get the information on all of that. And yeah, that's all I have for you guys. So can't wait to see you guys November the 3rd. And hope this message encourages you and strengthens you and does everything good for you. So we'll see you soon.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the house week 2 of Uncommon Joy, and I appreciate you sticking with me last week. I know it was a little longer. We had to intro the whole book. Tonight will be a little shorter than that and give you more time for discussion. But let me give you a little recap before we dive into chapter 1, verse 12. Last week we introduced the book of Philippians. We talked about this prison letter that Paul is writing, and he's in prison, and the most common word that he uses in the letter, other than the word Jesus, is joy, because he has so much joy as he's in prison. And that's the goal for us, is that we would have so much joy in Christ that no matter what happens to us in this life, no matter what circumstance you go through, what news you get, what diagnosis you get, happens amongst your friendships, your relationships, that any circumstance, no matter what happens circumstantially, that your joy is not shaken. And this is what we see in Paul. This is the letter that he's writing. He has so much joy as he's in prison. And he tells us at the beginning why. Because he's a servant of Christ. His identity, his reason for existing, his worth, his joy is all rooted in Christ. And because of that, his mission in his life is to proclaim Christ to everyone he knows. And I want to start tonight by asking you, Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ. Let me ask you, what are you a servant of? If you had to be honest, you don't have to say it out loud in your house group because that could get weird. Maybe you'd have enough courage and vulnerability too. But if you had to take an honest evaluation of your life, what are you a servant of? What are you currently serving? What end are you currently working towards or serving with your life? Where are you drawing your purpose from, or your reason for existing? Where are you drawing your joy from? Where are you getting your worth from, or your value from? Is it money? Is it a job? Is it a certain status? Is it athletics? Is it a marital status? Is it being a parent one day? Is it being noticed by people? Is it being the funny guy? Where are you trying to draw your worth and your significance and your satisfaction from? Honestly, a painful way to figure this out and to ask this question is, what's that one thing that if it was taken from you, you wouldn't feel any joy anymore? What's the thing? What's that one thing where if you feel like if you got news that you either this was going to be taken from you or you would never receive that thing, that life wouldn't be worth living anymore, that you wouldn't have a reason to keep going anymore? What if you were told that you would never get that job, or you were injured and you realized that you would never achieve that athletic status, you would never make that team, you would never get to play that sport again? What if you were told you'd never reach this financial barrier, this kind of status, you'd never reach that financial point? What if you were told you were never going to get married? What if you were told you would never have kids? What's the thing in you that you're kind of working towards, that you're kind of hoping, getting your hope or your satisfaction or your reason to keep going from? What is it? Would you be able to keep going if one of those things was taken from you? And here's why I'm asking you all these questions that aren't fun to think about. If your reason, if your source of joy, if your purpose in life is circumstantial, if it's getting a certain job, certain status, having kids, getting married, if it's circumstantial, then you can lose it in an instant with changing circumstances. If it's circumstantial, right? We saw this in 2008. We saw this all over the place in 2008. So many people committed suicide in 2008. Why? Because of the housing market crashed, the financial market crashed, and so many people, they lost money, and they didn't just lose their money, they lost their reason for existing. Because they drew their source and their worth and their value from their bank account. And when it was gone, when that business decision fell over, went bottoms up, they lost their reason. You didn't just take away my money, you took away my joy. You took away my reason for existing. You hear this all the time with athletes. Athletes are great. I have no slight against athletes. But one of the weaknesses of athletes is our sport that we play sometimes doesn't just become a sport that we play. It becomes an identity of who we are. It becomes our purpose. It becomes our why. It becomes the root of our joy. It becomes our reason. And then when you're an athlete and you turn 30 and you can't play your sport anymore, we see so many athletes go through depression. Why? Because you didn't just take away my job or my source of income. You took away my identity. You took away my reason for existing. If your identity or your purpose, your reason, your source of joy, your worth, if all that is circumstantial, then it can change with a change in circumstances. And here's the deal, guys. We are so much more fragile than we like to believe. That me and anybody watching this, that your life can change in an instant with a phone call or a text message. That your life can radically change. That something happened to someone you love, or that you can go to the doctor today and your life can instantly change with a diagnosis that you did not see coming. That we are so much more fragile than we think. And if our joy is rooted in circumstances, those circumstances can be taken in an instant. And this is why Paul is able to have joy as he's writing in prison. Look at what he says. His identity was in God. His role, his identity was a servant of Christ. His reason for existing was to know Christ and to help other people make him known, to proclaim the gospel. And that's why he has joy in prison. Look at verse 12. He says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me, this imprisonment, has really served to advance the gospel. So he's joyful. He's pumped about this. Guys, check this out. What's happened to me has furthering why I exist. It didn't take it away. This change in circumstances didn't take it away. It's actually helping my reason for existing. And for that, I am pumped. I have joy. Side note, if the Lord came to you and said, hey, I want to use you to advance the gospel. I want so many people to come to know me through you, but it's going to cost you your freedom. You're going to have to go to prison. Would you be willing to accept that for the sake of the gospel? Paul would joyfully say, yes, with probably some expletives in there. Sure, sign me up, gladly. If that advances the gospel, that's why I'm here. That's why I exist. Take my rights. Take my freedom. I have no rights. I'm a servant of Christ. Take whatever you got to take if it advances the gospel. And this is the heartbeat that we should have. If our joy is truly rooted in knowing Christ and helping other people know him as well, proclaiming the gospel, then that is our answer as well. But if we're honest, I don't know if we're there yet. I don't know if we could get there yet. But Paul is over the moon. What has happened to me has served to advance the gospel. Verse 13, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, and much more bold to speak the word without fear. So here's why he's over the moon. Because throughout the whole imperial guard, everybody knows that I'm here because of my relationship with Christ. They're asking questions about Christ. Their gaze has gone up towards Christ. They know that the reason I'm here is for the sake of Christ. And most of the brothers, most of the believers, because of my imprisonment, because I'm willing to accept this loss of my rights for the sake of the gospel, they have become confident in the Lord. Because I'm accepting this and I'm joyfully accepting this, they're no longer afraid to preach the gospel. Because they can see that because of the gospel of Jesus Christ, you can have joy in all circumstances. You can be thrown in prison and still have joy. So it's created this confidence in the people around him, and they're much more bold to speak the word without fear. Incredible. The whole imperial guard is not ashamed to preach the gospel because they see the example of Paul being thrown in prison and still having joy and still celebrating the fact that the gospel is going forth. Some indeed preach Christ, verse 15, some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to inflict me in my imprisonment. So that's verse 15, 16, and 17. Look at this. What's Paul talking about here? He's saying this, because I'm in prison, others have risen up to proclaim the gospel. There's this kind of leadership absence, right? Paul was the guy. He was well known as the guy that was proclaiming the gospel everywhere, getting beat up, all those things. He's thrown in prison. Now there's this kind of leadership hole. No one's doing it. And he says, other people have risen up to proclaim the gospel without fear. All these brothers are proclaiming the gospel because of the joy that I have in Christ and being thrown in prison. And he says, Some people, though, have risen up and they're preaching gospel from pure motives and some from impure motives. Let me read it one more time. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, right? Impure motives, but others from goodwill. The latter, those with goodwill, do it out of love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. That's why I'm here. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. And here's what he's saying. And if some of us, if we're really honest, we hide behind this desire if we want the gospel to go forth. We say that's our aim. But if we were really honest, what our true aim is that people would see how much God uses us. You don't necessarily care as much about as people hearing the gospel as much as they hear it from you. As much as people look around and go, wow, man, God sure uses him. Let's be impressed with him or her. And if we're honest, some of us can hide behind this good, noble task, this good, noble identity, this reason of, yeah, I just want the gospel to go forth. But really, we don't want it to go forth unless it goes forth through us. And we get the credit and the recognition for it. And Paul's addressing this right here. And he says, some people are doing it out of pure motives. Some people are doing it out of impure motives. And they show up. They think they're one-upping me. They think they're going to, this is my chance to kind of take Paul's fame and take his reputation and take his clout, to steal some of his, fans or his groupies, whatever. And here's the thing. If your reason or your identity, your why, your source of joy if it's wrapped up in something circumstantial, then everybody around you becomes a threat to you, because they might get that thing over you. And we got to see this. If whatever you're drawing your joy from, if it's circumstantial, if it's being the funny guy, then every single person around you that tells jokes is now a threat to you, and you resent them, right? Because you feel like they're taking a part of your identity. They're taking a part of your joy. If your identity is found in getting married, right? This circumstantial thing. If you think that's going to bring you all the hope and joy that you'll ever need, then you can't even celebrate the fact when other people get pregnant, right? You'll throw a little cute comment on Instagram, but deep down you resent this person for something that does not affect you at all, because it feels like they're taking a part of your value and your worth and your identity and your reason from you, because they're experiencing something that you're not. If your joy is wrapped up in getting married one day, right? We see this all the time, that when someone else gets engaged, yeah, you'll throw a cute comment on there, you'll send them a text, but deep down you resent them. Why? Because they're experiencing that circumstance that you think is going to complete you and fulfill you and give you joy. And it feels like that they're robbing and taking part of your identity or your reason. If you find your worth in getting that job, then everyone around you that could possibly get that job is now a threat to you, right? If you think that's going to fulfill you or complete your joy. If you find your joy in getting noticed by other people, by how much God uses you, then every other person who's proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ is now a competition with you and a threat to you. We see this in churches all the time. And we realize that our chief aim, our chief goal is not that the gospel goes forth, it's that the gospel goes forth through us. So that when other churches show up in our city, we don't go, man, there's so many people here. We're so glad you're here. We need the gospel to go forth. We start to get territorial and talk bad about other congregations and all those different things. Church politics, right? But you see how if something that is our aim, our goal, our reason for living, our purpose, our source of joy, if that is circumstantial, then everybody suddenly becomes a threat because they could achieve that circumstance before we could. How does Paul respond? This is exactly what he's getting at right here. Some people have shown up. They've got pure motives. They just want to see the gospel go forth. Some people want the gospel to go forth through them. They want to be noticed. They want to be recognized. They have impure motives. Look at what Paul says. Verse 18, he says, what then? He basically says, so what? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. He says, they think they're bothering me. Their motives, that's their own problem. That's on them. My reason for existing is that the gospel will go forth, that the people around me will experience the same gospel that I've experienced. And guess what? If you want to throw me in prison to keep me from doing that, I'll start a prison ministry. Keep me from traveling across the nations to proclaim the gospel, I'll proclaim it right here. Doesn't matter where you put me, right? Change my circumstances. You can't take my joy. You can't take my reason. I'll start a prison ministry. right? Don't let me go out in the city and be the guy that everyone notices and here's preaching the gospel. Let other people do that. Let them come in and try to steal the glory or steal the credit. Great. Circumstances change, doesn't steal my joy. I just want the gospel to go forth. And if they do it for good reasons or good motives or bad motives, their motives is on them. That's their own problem. I'm just glad the gospel's going forth because that's why I exist. That's what I want it to do. I want it to go forth. You can stop me from traveling. Doesn't matter. Gospel's going to go forth wherever you put me. You can throw me in prison and try to shut me up. Guess what? I've got a prison ministry now. I'm going to preach the gospel to the people in this cell next to me and they can't leave. Throw some people out in the city that start preaching the gospel for good motives and bad motives. Doesn't bother me. So what? Right? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. So, as I end, what's your joy rooted in? We see here that Paul, when his joy is rooted in the gospel of Jesus Christ that he's experienced going forth to everyone around him, doesn't matter what circumstances he's in, his joy is not rooted in a circumstance. His joy is rooted in the God that controls all circumstances. That's what's so beautiful about it. You need a joy. Your joy needs to be rooted in something greater, something above circumstances of life. It needs to be rooted in the God of all circumstances. And we see that in Paul, no matter how his circumstances changed. Throw me in prison, shut my mouth, get me away from a lot of people, put me isolated in prison, doesn't matter. The gospel's still going to go forth wherever you put me. And we'll see next week that even if they kill him, it's going to go forth. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.